Hello everyone, welcome to my video essay on commodification and its limits. Today I will be exploring the ethical boundaries of commodification, particularly focusing on the controversial topic of the global unregulated organ trade. And this case study is going to allow us to critically examine whether the sale of kidneys in unregulated markets undermines morality or whether it represents a legit exercise of bodily autonomy within a capitalistic framework. I'll be diving deeper into this throughout the video, but commodification tests the moral limits of markets, and while autonomy is critical, certain market practices raise profound ethical concerns about dignity, exploitation, and justice. So, again, just focusing on the commodification of human bodies and the moral dilemmas it presents. And also, while markets may offer life-saving solutions, they do also risk reducing the intrinsic value of human dignity while also perpetrating systematic inequalities even further in society. So to do so, I'm going to engage with 6 key philosophical texts and thinkers from our course, and I'm going to shed light on our main focus on Anne Phillips, but also John Mill, David Bellman, and mostly his Kantian or Kantian views or thoughts on it, and Karl Marx and Deborah Satz. But we're going to start off with Anne Phillips. But I think first, let's just get on to what even is commodification. So commodification, it refers to the process of turning services, goods, and especially in this case, we're going to be talking about even aspects of human life are being turned into objects of trade. And we're going to go into the ethical implications and the debates over the controversy if it promotes autonomy, justice, if it's very exploitive. We'll just get all into it, and also discussing how commodifications, they push the boundaries of what can really be considered a legitimate and moral market exchange, as well as raising questions about whether certain aspects of human life, such as body parts or labor, should be immune to market compensation in general. So, getting into Anne Phillips, in her text, It's My Body and I'll Do What I Like With It, she critiques commodification of the human body. Excuse me. She warns against treating bodies as objects or property or mere even like labor forces, and we'll get into that a little bit too later. But she's just arguing that commodification risks reducing human dignity to mere transactional value purely. And Phillips draws this critical distinction between autonomy and commodification. She claims while autonomy is about self-determination and really independence, commodification subordinates autonomy to market logic in a way where it seems like, it is your choice. In most cases, like the organ, sometimes, hopefully it's your choice, but at the end of the day, you are set up into this situation where is it really your choice? And we'll get more into that, but yeah. So Phillips' critique of commodification aligns with her broader concern that markets often ignore the relational and the embodied nature of human existence, and especially even just like the body in general. So when when body parts are actually commodified, the humans are then at risk to becoming a mere means to an end, or a mere means to an economic end, I should say, and eroding their dignity and self-worth. And even if you see this picture I have right over here, very deep, but other examples of humans being commodified in markets daily everywhere around society these days are human trafficking, sex trades, even terrible child labor and sweatshops. Just so much people just humans are very commodified right now, I believe. But and you'll see the sweatshops. I have a picture of that right here. Everything. It's really pure labor. You're here. They don't hire you for the person, and Graeber talked about that in his Bullshit Jobs. It's really you are there for labor. And again, we will see this tension between autonomy versus exploitation continuously reoccur within the more philosophical texts we're going to go through and within my presentation in general. But let's start expanding our analysis by examining some of the ethical frameworks of John Mill. We're going to do some David Vellman, mostly his Kantian his reflections on Kant, Deborah Satz, and Karl Marx. But yeah, so here are some philosophical reflections on commodification. But we're going to start off with Mill, and especially his utilitarianism. And let's start talking about Mill's principle of greatest happiness, because this really ties into commodification, I think, and its limits, because the greatest happiness principle measure was all about whether commodification maximizes overall well-being. So proponents of organ sales might argue that these markets do save lives and in some cases do provide financial relief, but very significant to also mention that Mill also emphasizes justice as integral to happiness. So when commodification disproportionately exploits marginalized populations, it does violate the principle of justice, undermining the very happiness it claimed to promote. But however, Mill also emphasizes justice as integral to happiness. But it's just really weird to think about. It's very contradicting. But we're going to now discuss some Vellman, but in those pictures it is Kant. But we're going to be talking about his take on Kantian, I hope I'm saying that right, ethics that David Vellman drew from him. So Vellman critiqued the commodification on the grounds that it treats people as mere means, again, like we were saying, to economic ends. The categorical imperative demands that human beings be respected as autonomous agents with intrinsic dignity. So organ sales, especially in unregulated markets, often reduce individuals to, again, mere economic utility, completely violating this ethical principle. So now we're going to dive into Marx, and I really like how Marx sort of ties into this commodification, but we're going to just analyze his Wage, Labor, and Capital text. So his critique, and he critiques capitalism in that And he really does provide a powerful lens to understand the commodification of human organs. Marx argues that capitalism alienates workers to begin with by reducing them to their labor, and then by extension themselves to commodities. So, in organ trade markets, this alienation is even more potent that you think. Individuals are forced by economic coercion to sell parts of their body to survive. And that's how I was saying before, when people would say, well, it is sort of like if you make that choice, yeah, but I feel like a lot of people are making this choice because we're literally in like a vacuum of exploitation. And I will say that later in this, but it really is true, I think. But just, it's a systematic setup and you really can't get out of it. And that's why I don't think it is right. But again, Marx's analysis highlights how these organ markets, just like I was saying, perpetuate systematic inequality. The wealthy buyers benefit at the expense of the impoverished sellers. That's the relationship they have. It's a social hierarchy that will probably keep going in a cycle because of this. But it creates this market dynamic that exploits their vulnerability rather than addressing it, and it's not good. But let's take a look at this infographic. It's titled "The Kidney World Order," and it visually represents the global disparity in the organ trade. As you can see, the map highlights two categories: the donor countries marked in red, and then the recipient countries marked in blue. And these distinctions, if you look at it, underscore a stark economic divide clearly, looking at income levels. So these donor countries are often located in economically disadvantaged regions like South Asia, Africa, and parts of Latin America. And that's where a majority of these kidney sellers reside. But on the other hand, the recipient countries predominantly are living in these wealthier nations, and they actually host the buyers who can afford these life-saving transplants. And again, this divide just illustrates the commodification of human organs as a market that exploits global inequalities. But while you're looking at this, just a little question you guys can think about. Sort of look at the graphic and see what it does reveal about moral and economic underpinnings of global markets in general. Do you think this is a case of autonomy in action? And good for them. Or is it really a coerced response to systematic injustice and inequality that we are just stuck in a cycle of? So that's something to think about, but we're going to move into more of our ethical frameworks with some other thinkers. We're going to move back with Ann Phillips right now. We're going to integrate her insights a little bit with those of Deborah Satz and her Why Some Things Should Not Be for Sale. And she identifies, these noxious markets, she calls it. And what these markets are, it's these markets that exploit and harm and endanger and just reinforce this inequality, and argues that organ trade exemplifies this category. So Phillips' critique of autonomy resonates here, that true autonomy cannot exist the conditions of harsh economic distress or economic fear or being threatened by your economic state. And Satz's framework portrays this by showing how such markets often disproportionately harm the vulnerable populations, again, while benefiting the few privileged few in the case. But again, let's go back to thinking about our study for a second. So in the organ trade, sellers frequently suffer from these long-term health consequences from these transplants, and they also, which I don't think gets a lot of notice, they really do lack a lot of legal resources, I feel. They don't have, like, it's just, they aren't it's like a business deal that's really not ethical, and again, just taking advantage of the vulnerable, I feel like, once again. But they, again, frequently suffer from these consequences. But again, these buyers and these intermediaries continue to profit, and it just, again, completely underscores the systematic injustices that both Phillips and Sats critique. But as we wrap up a little bit, I want to return to the case of Oregon commodification. I'm saying that word too much, but again, philosophers like Phillips, Mill, and Kant all provide insights into these ethical implications of treating human bodies as commodities. While autonomy is important, it cannot exist in a vacuum. Like I said before, in a vacuum of exploitation, a market that commodifies organs do risk undermining dignity and reinforcing inequality. So, well, something to think about while we wrap this up. Do you think markets should have absolute freedom, or are there limits that should not be crossed, honestly? And the commodification of human organs raises a fundamental ethical question about where we draw the line between legitimate economic exchange and exploitation. But I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you.